Hello there, little masters, and welcome to another weekly episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast, where tonight the good stuff will grab you in its talons and carry you high into the mountains.
West to Hall, my friends. I'm Sean Marchese, the real-life Lord of the Mark, and I'm here with the Man of the West, the Aragorn to my Aemir, Alan Sisto.
Thank you, Sean, but not the warg to your wolf?
Oh, man. That's a big missed opportunity there.
Yeah, you missed that one.
Yeah. Maybe you should start writing these.
No, that's all right. Thanks, though. Folks, tonight we pick up the story again where we left it, with Bilbo and friends up in the trees, surrounded by wargs in Chapter 6 of The Hobbit, out of the frying pan into the fire.
Did you say pick up?
I did.
See what you did there. For once, it didn't fly right over my head.
Well, that's why I'm glad you're my wingman.
We probably should stop there.
We should have stopped sooner.
We probably should have stopped a couple of lines ago. But folks, as you can probably guess from our bad bird jokes, tonight we're going to welcome back to the podcast everyone's favorite birds, the elite air units of Manwë, the eagles of the Misty Mountains.
All in good time, my friend, but first, it's time for another installment of Philology Fair.
You know how much I love that music stinger. It's my absolute favorite.
I do, Sean.
And I thank you for that, Alan.
You're welcome.
So for tonight's installment of Philology Fair, I'm going to go back to the first part of this chapter, which we covered in our last episode. You'll recall that I pointed out the return of one of my favorite words from Chapter 1, confusticate.
Ah, yes.
And, of course, who can forget Bilbo back during the unexpected party in Chapter 1 when he said, confusticate and bebother these dwarves, when nobody would help him bring out the food. Mm-hmm. And then in this chapter, and the part we covered last time, Dory returned that sentiment by saying, and here we are without the burglar, confusticate him. Now, there's actually one more occurrence of this delightful word later on, but we'll get to that eventually, and you can bet that I'll point it out when we do. But
I have a feeling you will.
But for now, I just wanted to take a little look into the etymology of this word using one of my favorite word nerd resources. Now, I'm speaking of the book Ring of Words, Tolkien and the Oxford English Dictionary, and you've heard me talk about it before. Folks hopefully have had a chance to go out and track down a copy of that somewhere. But I wanted to look into this book to see if they had anything on the history of confusticate, and sure enough, they did.
Of course.
So here's what they had to say on it. Confusticate means confound, and the Oxford English Dictionary quotes this sentence from The Hobbit as its most recent example. The word is, in effect...
That's not very recent.
No.
I mean, I'm just pointing that out.
Well, that's true, but, for the Oxford English Dictionary...
Nobody's used it in 80 years since then, huh?
I think, believe it or not, I think this book actually does mention a few more recent examples, but...
Okay.
I mean, hey, 80 years for the Oxford English Dictionary, that's true. Practically yesterday.
That's a drop in the bucket. Yeah, that's true.
But, basically this Ring of Words book goes on to say, the word is, in effect, an elaboration of confuse with a Latinate suffix, as though a less than well-educated rustic or schoolboy were trying to sound impressive.
Hey, who are you calling rustic?
I know. Those of us who use confusticate all the time. I resemble that statement.
There you go.
The book goes on to say that the word actually appears in a song from an 1866 play by W.S. Gilbert, later of Gilbert and Sullivan fame. And that there's a similar word, confuscate, that's actually recorded in a dialect from South Lincolnshire with the same meaning, but not nearly so good to say, quoting the authors of Ring of Words there. So that's really all there is to it. It's just a fun little word created by taking an ordinary word, like confuse, and then making it sound more highfalutin with a phony Latin suffix. But I got to say, I was really struck by this idea of making this word kind of sound more highfalutin. And so I did a little bit more looking.
That's a Texas phrase, isn't it?
Highfalutin? Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Definitely a
We don't say that here.
Really? Definitely.
California? We don't say anything about highfalutin.
I guess not. We say it...
High and mighty, maybe, but not highfalutin.
Not highfalutin?
Anyway.
No. It must be a Southern thing, yeah. Because it's not just Texas. It was a Louisiana thing, too. I've been using that word, since I was a small child. I mean, not in class, of course, not around teachers.
Of course not.
or authority figures. But no, I did a little looking for some more of these phony Latin terms, and I came across two that were a lot of fun I wanted to bring up. Bloviate, which we've used before.
Yeah,
we've used it in reference to Thorin, especially when he's going on in his overwrought speech. Now, Tolkien doesn't use that word, but we have, so I thought it was worth bringing up. And flabbergastation. which is actually a word of Tolkien's. Tolkien had used it in an early draft of the first chapter of The Lord of the Rings, but he eventually took it out, which is a shame, really, because I personally think flabbergastation should be a part of everybody's vocabulary.
I am flabbergasted that it isn't.
I know, right?
Now let's get on with the discussion,
All right,
shall we?
thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and start out. When we last left off, of course, the Bilbo and the dwarves were in the trees, and they're about to hear some very important things. So I'm going to go ahead and pick up right where we left off.
All right.
The wargs and the goblins often helped one another in wicked deeds. Goblins do not usually venture very far from their mountains, unless they are driven out and are looking for new homes, or are marching to war, which I am glad to say has not happened for a long while. But in those days they sometimes used to go on raids, especially to get food or slaves to work for them. Then they often got the wargs to help and shared the plunder with them. Sometimes they rode on wolves like men do on horses. Now it seemed that a great goblin raid had been planned for that very night. The wargs had come to meet the goblins, and the goblins were late. The reason, no doubt, was the death of the great goblin, and all the excitement caused by the dwarves and Bilbo and the wizard, for whom they were probably still hunting. In spite of the dangers of this far land, bold men had of late been making their way back into it from the south, cutting down trees and building themselves places to live in, among the more pleasant woods in the valleys and along the river shores. There were many of them, and they were brave and well armed, and even the wargs dared not attack them if there were many together or in the bright day. But now they had planned with the goblins' help to come by night upon some of the villages nearest the mountains. If their plan had been carried out, there would have been none left there next day. All would have been killed except the few the goblins kept from the wolves and carried back as prisoners to their caves. Charming folk.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Real people persons.
Well, if by people you mean like wanting to eat
like
them.
wanting to enslave and eat people. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
pretty
definitely-
much.
Kind of like how I'm a steak guy. The goblins are people. Yeah,
But
really.
not like you're a cat guy.
No.
I mean, I just want to make sure we get that really clear, because you are a cat guy.
I am a
but
cat guy, but that's a different kind of appreciation.
Yeah.
I appreciate
Yes, it
cats
is.
for their company, not for their tender, delicious
Yeah.
meat. I'm so
Are you
sorry.
saying they have...
I am so sorry for that.
I'm going to run this so far down, I can't wait just to see how far down the rabbit hole you go. No, I'm just kidding. Oh, goodness.
Yeah, there's
Okay, so...
a couple of interesting
go
things
ahead.
about this. The first thing that jumps out at me is, they help each other. The wargs and the goblins help each other. We talked, I think we
In
talked...
wicked deeds.
In
yeah.
wicked deeds, yes. So we talked, I think, last time about the fact that the wargs are not domesticated by the goblins. They're not.
That's right.
They're not kept by the goblins. They're more like allies in these wicked deeds. They work together.
Yep.
It's interesting that they've been working together for thousands of years. We saw back in the Silmarillion, chapter 19.
That's right.
We saw that the orcs. There was a reference to the orcs riding upon great wolves in that chapter.
Yep. There absolutely
So
was.
they've definitely been doing this for a long time. It's the other thing that's interesting about this is that it says that they sometimes rode on wolves like men do on horses.
Mm-hmm.
Now, does that mean that goblins or orcs never ride on horses? And I'm trying to think. I can't think of a time when I've seen a goblin or an orc ride a horse.
I don't think they could, at least...
Maybe just because of their
size-wise.
stature.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Aren't they more like, hobbits or dwarves in that size, and so they could theoretically maybe ride on ponies, but certainly for war, they would that would be rather ineffective.
Yeah. Although that's interesting, if they actually did come from elves, how they would have. I mean, I guess just the corruption has
Shrunken.
diminished them in stature.
Yeah. I don't know.
They
That's a very good
they probably
question.
Just don't have.
Something.
They probably don't have straight backs anymore, straight legs. They're. I kind of imagine them as bow-legged and hunchbacked.
Takes
a lot
more
of times.
skill, perhaps, to ride a horse
Could
than
be.
to ride a warg.
Yeah.
One might imagine. I don't know.
Yeah,
It could also be that horses simply won't bear them.
could be.
That, the only ones that would be the ones,
Maybe like
Frodo
some of the
asked
ones
that
that-
question of Gandalf.
Right.
Remember when they in
The
Rivendell,
Black
after
Riders'
he's-
horses, yeah.
Yeah, he asks, how the horses, how do they do this? And,
Yeah.
and Gandalf explains that, look, they raise horses in Mordor too.
Right.
And those are the ones that will bear these evil creatures.
But maybe they're more expensive, and so they're kept for the Black Riders and the Mouth
Exactly.
of Sauron,
They're
like
certainly
the captains,
not for
the rank and file
run-of-the-mill
orc.
goblins.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. That's an interesting question, though. Maybe we'll have to dig into that a little bit for our postscript.
Yeah, maybe so.
So they definitely, they ally with each other. They're allies of convenience in this case. The wargs get to share the plunder. and in the meantime, the goblins get more food and slaves.
Yep.
Interesting here that, the wargs are on time, the goblins are late, and they're late, of course, because, the great goblin's dead.
Right.
It's
been a weird day for them.
It's been a weird day. I'm sure that they would probably have texted the captain of the wargs,
Sure.
yo, running late, GG dead, and they're trying to know what that means.
GG dead, sad face.
Yeah.
Going back up a little bit, yeah. So they're attacking these men from the south. These brave woodmen,
Yeah.
I think they're called, aren't they?
I wonder where they're coming from, these men from the south. How far south are they coming from? Are these, maybe some of the... Are these folks from Gondor? Are these folks from Rohan?
I wonder. Yeah, I mean, we're not told.
More Rohan, I would imagine.
We're not told where. I mean, the fact that they're called woodmen makes me want. I actually went looking for this word woodman in some of the other texts just to see if there was any key as to who they were. I did find a reference to some woodmen. Again, this is thousands of years ago, but during at the disaster of the Gladden Field, there were some woodmen who appeared on the scene after Isildur's men had been slaughtered. And
that's same region.
It is the same region. That's exactly what I was thinking. So these could be descendants of those. Maybe they've just been living in this area. Maybe some of them have migrated to, sort of the outer Rohan area.
Right.
I can't imagine they're from much farther than that. But
no, these are not high men.
Right. Yeah. But it's interesting. It
is interesting.
I looked for more on this. There's not a ton out there on it.
Yeah, there is.
But I mean, I think they're not, as you say, they're not high men. They're definitely not, Dunedain, Gondorians, Numenorians, anything like that. But I have to think that these are some of those other Northmen who were, of the Edain, but just the ones that didn't go to Numenor, kind of like the Rohirrim were.
Right, exactly. That's what I was thinking, is descended from the same stock.
Right, and that would actually make them related to the men of Dale, too, wouldn't it? Dale and Lake
it would, actually.
So probably related to them. Again, it's all the same region, and maybe these are just some that have just, decided to homestead out in the country as opposed to, living under a king.
Yeah. I like how, once again, we see how when things work out, they work out for so many people, even people who are just tangentially involved. The fact that Bilbo and the dwarves got through the mountains, that the great goblin was killed, and that here they are in the midst of what was supposed to be their little council meeting, has actually saved the lives of this entire village.
That's true.
Huge.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that couldn't have been farther from the intentions of Thorin and Gandalf. They had no idea, but it's just like you said, things have a way of working out.
Yeah, that's really cool. Love to see that stuff. Let's see. Is there anything else more on that passage before we move on? I don't think so.
This other passage jumped out at me about how the goblins just want to capture prisoners and devour people. I'm sorry, the wargs just want to capture prisoners and devour people waked suddenly from their sleep.
Right.
Again,
that's true.
It's a reminder of how cowardly
Attacking
and how
the
bully
weak.
these guys are.
Yeah. Now that makes sense. I mean, here they are even earlier. They're just putting wargs at the bottom of each tree. They're not doing anything yet because they don't really have the courage necessarily to do what might need to be done. Mm-hmm. Well, they also don't have opposable thumbs.
True. There is that.
There is that. They can't climb trees, but they know people who can.
Right.
We know people. It's going to get really hard for you. You shouldn't have come here. Anyway.
Lovely.
We try. All right, so so they do end up thinking, we don't read that part, but they do end up thinking that that Gandalf and Bilbo and the dwarves are friends of the woodmen, that they're here to spy on them, and so that now they're going to have a fight. And they don't want to have to fight; they want to be able to eat people when they're sleeping.
Right.
So they're going to not let these folks escape, and they're going to wait for the goblins. So with that as our segue, why don't you take that next passage?
This is a fun one.
Right. It is. I don't know why I let you have it.
I thank you for it.
Merry Christmas.
Now you can understand why Gandalf, listening to their growling and yelping, began to be dreadfully afraid, wizard though he was, and to feel that they were in a very bad place, and had not yet escaped at all. All the same, he was not going to let them have it all their own way, though he could not do very much stuck up in a tall tree with wolves all round on the ground below. He gathered the huge pine cones from the branches of the tree. Then he set one alight with bright blue fire, and threw it whizzing down among the circle of the wolves. It struck one on the back, and immediately his shaggy coat caught fire, and he was leaping to and fro, yelping horribly. Then another came, and another, one in blue flames, one in red, another in green. They burst on the ground in the middle of the circle, and went off in colored sparks and smoke. A specially large one hit the chief wolf on the nose, and he leaped in the air 10 feet, and then rushed round and round the circle, biting and snapping even at the other wolves in his anger and fright. The dwarves and Bilbo shouted and cheered. The rage of the wolves was terrible to see, and the commotion they made filled all the forest. Wolves are afraid of fire at all times, but this was a most horrible and uncanny fire. If a spark got in their coats, it stuck and burned into them, and unless they rolled over quick, they were soon all in flames.
Ooh, what a passage.
I know, it's great. Thank you for
I
that.
love that. I love the creativity in Gandalf's magic. That, they're not all just red.
No, different
There's
colors.
Blue
Yeah.
and red and green. There's sparks and, colored sparks
Yeah.
and smoke. And he even throws the pine cone of rage +2 at the chief wolf and it, or berserker or whatever it does. And it turns him into, start attacking his own men.
Yeah. I think
Great stuff.
I feel like there's an element of intimidation here,
Oh, yeah.
This
is supposed to be.
You are supposed to see that this is not a natural fire.
No.
This is an uncanny fire. I love that use of that word.
Isn't that a great word?
It is such a great
really
word,
is.
and I think it's worth noting that, we usually use the word uncanny these days to mean strange or surreal or, odd.
Unusual.
But it originally did mean supernatural, basically.
Yeah.
That's
eerie, otherworldly.
Yeah, otherworldly is a good word for it. So, this is an indication that this is a magical fire.
Yeah. As if the fact that they weren't in blue, red, and green,
Blue, red, and green, yeah.
primary colors bouncing
Yeah.
all over the place.
Yeah. It's great stuff.
Okay, I said primary colors. Somebody's going to correct me on that. I'm thinking of an RGB monitor, but they're not primary colors because then, of course, it would be blue, red, and yellow, and I know that.
Blue,
Just
red,
wanna make
are
sure.
blue, red, and green the primary colors of light, though? Is that...
They're on a monitor. You're
Yeah.
talking about like an RGB monitor,
yeah.
so it's red, green, blue color space. But in terms of actual colors,
primary colors of pigments, it's like red. Well, it's like cyan, magenta, and yellow, isn't it?
well, that's CMYK is a whole other ballgame. I was just thinking of primary colors.
Oh, just like red, blue, and yellow.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to make sure because I know I'm going to get corrected.
Well,
if I said
that's
red,
all right
green,
because I'm
blue,
going to get
or
even more
primary.
corrected because I know less about it than you do, obviously. But
Apparently so. I know that one is additive and one is subtractive, but I forget which is which.
well, I think back to when we talked about the Spring of Arda, and we talked about the blue light and the yellow light of the two lamps.
Oh yeah.
And I think I suggested that they would look like a green light
Turn
in the middle.
green.
But somebody
somebody
corrected me and said, no, actually, if it's blue light and yellow light, if it's a
They
light,
have together to be white.
they would come together as white. It's like perfect white light.
Yep.
It's very interesting.
And it is. And you'd think that as a photographer I would know some of these things, but I don't. That's just not the kind of I don't deal with colored lights.
Yeah. Colors are
It would make
confusticating.
my job hard. Yeah, the colors are confusticating. I love how quickly this works. I mean, these guys are freaking out.
Oh yeah.
They're running around. They're starting fires all over the place. This is awesome stuff.
Yeah.
And it looks like, hey, this might be exactly what they needed.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to make just a quick note about, just as an example of the fascinating array of Tolkien scholarship there is out there. I mentioned this in our postscript to the last episode, this book, The Flora of Middle-earth.
Yeah.
And I won't say much about it here except to say that there is stuff about pine trees in this book. Basically, this book, Flora of Middle-earth, talks about basically every plant that's mentioned in Tolkien's books, both the real world ones and some of the
Middle-earth
fictitious ones
yeah.
like Athelas and things like that. But there is some information in here about pine trees and why they're so flammable. Talking about the the chemicals that are in them. These these compounds, the same compounds that
There's also information about the larch.
the larch. Yes, that's right. There is.
Just wanted to make sure you knew that.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up again. But yeah, no, it's just it's fascinating to see. Just again, there's just so much great stuff out there about Tolkien, and I know nothing about trees, but I've learned a little bit about pines from reading this book about how these these certain compounds like terpenes and things like that make pine cones so flammable, and that's the effect that these are having. And it makes me wonder, if Tolkien had experienced lighting pine cones on fire as a kid. Like
I don't know.
had he seen
Right.
pine cones on fire exploding, like,
Yeah, I would imagine they would.
holy
like
hand
little tiny
grenade style,
grenades. Yeah. These are the holy hand grenades of Antioch, aren't
Totally are, yeah.
they? Gandalf hands it to Frodo.
Oh,
Pull
man.
the pin, count to 3. 1,
2, 5.
5.
3, sir.
Did I say Frodo? I meant Bilbo.
I knew what you meant.
You knew who I meant.
I knew what you
Did
meant.
everybody else know what I meant? But and thou shalt lobst thy holy hand grenade towards thy foe.
Once
who-
the number 3, being the third number, be reached, then lobbest thou thy hand grenade of Antioch towards thy foe.
who, being naughty in my sight, shall snuff it. Amen.
Amen.
Ah, the Book of Armaments.
Consult the Book of Armaments. All right, we'll be here all
We're going to
night.
be here all night, folks. Oh, goodness.
It is a holy fire. Consider who Gandalf is and where his
That's
power
true.
comes from.
Yep.
I think
Absolutely.
these are holy hand grenades,
The holy hand grenades of Arda.
holy pine grenades, holy pine grenades of Wilderland.
There you go. Well, let's see what's going on with our new friends, shall we? I'm going to go ahead and pick up here in a little bit.
All right.
What is all this uproar in the forest tonight?
Okay, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm so glad because I was not going to be able to hold that laugh back. Oh my gosh.
Polly want a cracker?
I was thinking about doing them.
Carry the Hobbit.
There you go. Actually, I would have, if I could have, my voice just wouldn't do it. But remember in Aladdin, Gilbert Gottfried's
Oh, Iago.
Iago.
Yeah.
I was going to do it in Iago's voice.
Oh man, that would have been great. I'm not sure if I can do a Gottfried voice.
No,
I'm sure I can't.
I know I can. I'm dealing with bronchitis, so it would be the last thing I'd say
man.
for the next 48 hours.
No, let's not do that to poor Lord of the Eagles.
No. He's unnamed here, but probably Gwahir.
Yeah, I think it's probably Gwahir, but yeah, let's not do that to him.
What is all this uproar in the forest tonight? Said the Lord of the Eagles. He was sitting, black in the moonlight, on the top of a lonely pinnacle of rock at the eastern edge of the mountains. I hear wolves' voices. Are the goblins in mischief in the woods? He swept up into the air, and immediately 2 of his guards from the rocks at either hand leaped up to follow him. They circled up in the sky and looked down upon the ring of the wargs, a tiny spot far, far below. But eagles have keen eyes and can see small things at a great distance. The Lord of the Eagles of the Misty Mountains had eyes that could look at the sun unblinking and could see a rabbit moving on the ground a mile below, even in the moonlight. So though he could not see the people in the trees, he could make out the commotion among the wolves and see the tiny flashes of fire and hear the howling and yelping come up faint from far beneath him. Also, he could see the glint of the moon on goblin spears and helmets as long lines of the wicked folk crept down the hillsides from their gate and wound into the wood. Eagles are not kindly birds. Some are cowardly and cruel. But the ancient race of the northern mountains were the greatest of all birds. They were proud and strong and noble-hearted. They did not love goblins or fear them. When they took any notice of them at all, which was seldom, for they did not eat such creatures, they swooped on them and drove them shrieking back to their caves and stopped whatever wickedness they were doing. There you go.
Nice.
Whatever wickedness they were doing. So here's Tolkien setting up the Eucatastrophe.
Yeah.
He's already getting things, moving the chess
Eagles
pieces
are
into
coming.
place.
Yep.
Yeah. We'll talk more about that a little bit.
For sure.
But I want to first talk a little bit about kind of what happens here in terms of what they notice. They're not paying that much attention. These are eagles. Their function is to eat. They're looking for, which is why they don't pay attention to the goblins for the most part.
Right.
They taste terrible. They're all stringy, and there's just hardly any meat on their bones. And I'm sure
Apparently
they're just,
Gollum didn't think so, but yeah, I would see why.
golems.
Gollum
just need a break
doesn't
from
really have
seafood.
very high standards. No, but
No, really.
Yeah,
really.
no,
Raw, wriggling fish is at the top of his menu list, so I'm going to say that probably doesn't bode well for his culinary tastes. But,
fair enough.
So that's the thing. The eagles here, they don't particularly care
Right.
about the goblins. They don't love them. They're not big fans, but they probably don't normally go out of their way. But thankfully, they catch what's going on. Now, would they have been able to spot this without the fire? I mean, they would have heard it, but would they have investigated it without seeing below all the fire, the commotion among the wolves, and the tiny flashes of fire? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems as they may not have. It was the voices that first
got their
alerted
attention.
them. But yeah, I mean, what did they do? They went and checked it out, and had they not seen all this, it's quite likely they would have just said, "Oh, well, it's just goblins and wolves doing their thing."
Doesn't concern us.
Yeah. And that's very interesting, really important to point out, because we've talked before about the role of the eagles. And I think it's worth noting that these eagles do have they have their own free will. They have their own agency here. They're not sent by Manwë to pick up Gandalf and the crew.
That was the thing I was going to notice. It was the thing I was going to mention, was that these are clearly not quite the same eagles that we are accustomed to from the Silmarillion. These are not Manwë's right-hand birds.
Right. And we even see, that it says, while the eagles are good, it says they're not kindly birds, No. They're just basically the enemies of whoever's evil.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. That's a very good point, because, just like the wargs may be the allies of the goblins, there are times when they're not necessarily the allies of the goblins. The eagles would certainly never ally with either of those, but there are going to be times where they don't ally with other good.
Right.
We'll see later on some discussions about why they're not necessarily allied with the woodmen. And obviously, because they mind their own business, they're not always on the lookout for evil. So these are not, paladins with wings looking to save people.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's important because, we have talked before about the role the eagles play in the Silmarillion, and even at the beginning of this episode, I kind of call them the elite air units of Manwë.
Yeah.
They were
here.
created by Manwë, but these are not they're not strictly doing Manwë's bidding. And I think I think I myself have said, a few times in the past, maybe they only do Manwë's bidding, maybe they're always emissaries of Manwë. It is very clear here that they are not.
That's correct.
They've got their own agenda. They've got their own free will.
I wonder how much of that is because this wasn't originally set in that same world. We talked often about how Tolkien's initial perspective on this was that it wasn't set in that same
in the legendarium.
cycle.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because certainly we do get back to that feeling of being kind of Manwë's tools, if you will, in the Lord of the Rings because of how much work they do on Gandalf's behalf.
That's true. And even
especially at the end.
Yeah, definitely. And even maybe later here in the Battle of the Five Armies, maybe their role there is a little bit more.
Maybe, though. What a tiny little battle that really is in the
grand
big scheme of things. I mean, if it weren't for the ring, that would be the most. It wouldn't have even made the history books. So
that's a good point. It's an interesting question. I mean, I remember seeing some stuff in Rateliff's book in the History of the Hobbit.
Good. I thought you might get there. Yeah.
There's an essay on eagles in this area of the book, the part of the book that deals with this chapter.
Good.
And he kind of draws a direct contrast between the eagles and the wolves, as of the two animals. The animals on the side of good and the animals on the side of evil. And
we talked about the wolves before. They're not domesticated. They're not.
Right. That comparison you just now drew. They're not domesticated. They're they work with the forces of evil, and so. Sometimes, and as we said, the eagles will sometimes work with the forces of good. It's interesting that we find them playing a very different role here from what we see in the rest of the legendarium, because one of the quotes that I've got here from Rateliff is he does say, in regards to the fact that they're not kindly birds, he says they are nevertheless foes of evil who put a stop to the goblins' wickedness whenever they can. We've seen that. The next part, the next paragraph from Rateliff says, "Indeed, far from being children of Morgoth, as has been the case with most of the other races the Hobbit has encountered since leaving his home, always exempting the elves and elf friends, a long-established tradition in Tolkien's work, going back to the Book of Lost Tales, portrays eagles as the messengers of Manwë, guardians of Gondolin, bitter foes of Melko, or we would later call Morgoth." So this is clearly a case where Tolkien had this tradition of the eagles to draw from, but he is deviating from it here, and I think.
I wonder though if that's partly because he didn't want to use them the way he'd used them before. Because I was looking later in that same essay, and Rateliff has some things to say along those lines. People, I think this is the thing that people think of when they think of the eagles, and that's a deus ex machina.
Right.
And Rateliff says that Tolkien himself felt that the eagles were a dangerous device, apt to be overused as a deus ex machina. He deplored their ubiquitous appearance throughout the first movie script for a potential Lord of the Rings movie sent to him in '58. This is the
we're talking
the
about
Ackerman.
The Ackerman script.
that Ackerman
Or
sent
not, sorry,
him.
Ackerman didn't write it. It was a Zimmerman.
Right, Ackerman forwarded on to him. He was
yeah.
the contact. But yeah, this was the Zimmerman script.
Right.
All marked out in red.
Yes.
Anyway, Rateliff goes on to say that, indeed, in The Hobbit they appear only twice, and in The Lord of the Rings only 3 times, with 2 of those episodes being off stage. The rescue of Gandalf from Orthanc, which was, of course, not off stage in the film, and the retrieval of his body from atop Zerog-Zigil. Close examination of the Silmarillion text shows the danger. The more times Tolkien rewrote the stories, the more new episodes featuring the eagles worked their way in. And then Rateliff goes on to say that Tolkien was fond of his eagles and found it difficult to keep them out of each of the major stories that make up the cycle. And he goes on to point out some of our favorite moments: Fingolfin's duel with Morgoth, Beren and Luthien, and the fall of Gondolin. So, they show up in all of those places, and that's because he really did love the eagles. I can't blame him.
And having created them as a device in the Silmarillion, he really kind of, let's get the eagles in here too.
Yeah, he really does.
And to good effect, I would say, in the Silmarillion for the most part. But yeah, I could see how that would get really dangerous.
Yeah, as an author, it'd be really easy to fall back on that, and maybe challenging. The challenging part would be finding a solution for your characters that doesn't involve, airborne mighty eagles.
Right.
Rateliff has a nice quote here. I'm going to read it, a short paragraph. The wizard's words, he's talking about the beginning of the next chapter when he says, "May the wind under your wings bear you where the sun sails and the moon walks." Those words obliquely tie into the cosmology of the created world and reaffirm that the great eagles are indeed the eagles of Manwë, either spirits incarnated as birds or their mortal descendants, just as the wargs are descended from spirits of evil that had taken wolf form. The eagles and the wargs neatly counterpose each other, and each play in our story what had already by 1930 become their traditional roles in the stories that comprise Tolkien's legendarium, the one to threaten the heroes and the other to intervene when all hope had been lost and deliver them from evil, almost as a visible grace. Deus ex indeed.
There you go. That's the passage that I was thinking of, where the direct comparison was drawn between the eagles and the wargs. Yeah.
Well, and that certainly eliminates my theory that maybe they weren't quite the same eagles at that point. I mean, Rateliff very, very clearly here makes it, obvious, makes it very plain that indeed, even here, they are the eagles of Manwë.
That's true. And we've talked about the fact that although we don't know exactly who the Lord of Eagles is, it's quite likely that it's Gwaihir, the same Lord of the Eagles that we see in Lord of the Rings. And Gwaihir was a descendant of Thorondor from the first age, who,
Well, it's almost certainly not Thorondor himself.
Probably not. I don't imagine. I imagine 6,000, 7,000 years.
Is getting a little stiff.
Yeah. 7,000 in bird years has got to be insane.
Man. Yeah.
But, yeah, it is very interesting. So they are the eagles of Manwë, but, contrary to some things we've said about them earlier, some speculations we've made about them, they're not just the tools of Manwë. They do have, as I said, they kind of have their own agency.
Clear agency. Yeah, they really do.
What I do think is interesting about the role they have here is that, if you recall from Silmarillion Chapter 3, it was actually Melkor who made the Misty Mountains. Remember,
that's right.
The Silmarillion
to hinder the riding of Orome,
That's right. Yep, to hinder the riding of Orome. It says the mountains were the Hithiglir, the towers of mist upon the borders of Eriador, and they were reared by Melkor to hinder the riding of Orome. So
there you go.
He created them as his own defense.
There, by the way, I just remembered that line.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it could almost be that it was his sort of answer to the Pilori in in the West and on. You guys got mountains. I'm going to build mountains too.
I'm going to build mountains.
I'm going to get my own mountains. They're going to have Balrogs underneath them. But what we see is that it ends up being Manwë's eagles who watch over them.
Yep.
I think that's cool, and that reminds us who is the true king of Arda.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing it reminds me of is one of our mutual favorite chapters, Chapter 2 of the Silmarillion.
Oh, yes.
And I won't read this whole part, but there's this whole exchange between Manwë and Yavanna about the creation of the Ents and the fact that the eagles are going to be coming. And, Yavanna is given this sort of revelation by Manwë that she will be given permission to make the Ents, the shepherds of the trees.
Right.
And it says Yavanna was glad, and she stood up, reaching her arms toward the heavens, and she said, "High shall climb the trees of Kementari, that the eagles of the king may house therein." But Manwë rose also, and it seemed that he stood to such a height that his voice came down to Yavanna as from the paths of the winds. "Nay," he said, "only the trees of Aule will be tall enough. In the mountains the eagles shall house." And I'll stop there, but it's just
I love that. What a passage that is.
Such a great passage, and it's just I'm reminded of both of those things when I see here that the eagles have taken control of the Misty Mountains, at least the above ground part of it. They're kind of watching over the whole thing, and as you said, they're not. It's not like they're stopping everybody who comes through, but
no.
They see everything that goes on.
Yeah, they're not the Misty Mountain Police,
Right. No. But I kind of love that.
Yeah. So he gets a few more eagles together. They get closer. They're checking it out. We're not going to read all of that. I mean, there's a lot to read tonight, but they start to get a little closer, and they're able to see what had happened. So they start to see that there's more fire. They notice the goblins coming up. And in fact, the transition goes from the Lord of the Eagles observing all of this, and all of a sudden you just kind of get back into narrative, and you're back down on the ground, and the goblins came up running and yelling. They think there's a battle. They start laughing.
And the goblins, you notice, are not afraid of fire.
That's important.
We saw
that's
in that
really
other
important.
passage that I mentioned, that I read, that the wolves are afraid of fire, but the goblins are not. That's another reminder of the difference between the civilized evil, the goblins, and the wild evil of the wolves.
Wild evil. That's right. So we start to see that they start taking control of the situation, right? They gather the wolves together. They stack some wood around the tree trunks. They put out all the other fires except for the ones that are closest to the trees,
and they actually feed those.
Kind of directing them. Yeah, they direct them back to the dwarves. Really creepy. I mean, there's no doubt what they immediately start thinking of. Well, I think we can solve this problem, can't we?
Yeah.
Like you said, they're not afraid of fire, and they start using it as a tool.
Oh, and they're celebrating. They're dancing around it like a midsummer bonfire. This is
this is
a celebration
central
for them.
Oh yeah, and it's a celebration for them, but it's not a celebration for Bilbo and the dwarves.
Not quite.
No, but they get to listen to a couple of cool songs from the goblins' party lists. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about that first one?
First up on the Goblins' Let's Cook the Dwarves playlist. And these are truly Vogon bad songs here. I'll go with the first.
Boy, these are terrible bad.
All right, let me get my goblin voice ready here. He could hear the goblins beginning a horrible song. 15 birds in 5 fir trees, their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze. But funny little birds, they had no wings. Oh, what shall we do with the funny little things? Roast them alive or stew them in a pot? Fry them, boil them, and eat them hot?
Wow.
Then they stopped and shouted out, "Fly away, little birds! Fly away if you can! Come down, little birds, or you will get roasted in your nests. Sing, sing, little birds, why don't you sing?"
Well, presumably because they have better taste in music than the goblins, but
it wouldn't take.
Man.
It's a low bar.
It really is. That's true. It is a low bar.
I do love, and I had to resist the urge to sing the version of this song, this song to the tune from the Rankin Bass.
Yeah.
Because that's a really cute. I like it. It's like a cute little
is.
kind of jaunty goblin song, but I guess I tried to go a little nastier,
a little darker, a little more goblin-y. I love how this is kind of like the Goblin County Fair, that one of the choices is to fry them. Because,
of course, yeah.
Everything at a county fair.
They'll deep fry everything.
They'll deep fry anything, man. Deep fried dwarf and deep fried hobbit. Why not?
Yeah.
Just creepy. And I love how they're just taunting.
Oh, man.
They're taunting them. Fly away,
Yeah. Calling them funny little things. This is just one of those, like, kind of trash talking,
Oh, yeah.
talking down to them.
Funny little birds. They They had no wings. Huh. I wonder, are they really birds? Maybe not. I mean, there's this really just kind of really mocking, dripping sarcasm.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a good point.
I mean, they know full well these aren't birds, and they're taunting them like, yeah, go ahead, fly away. Yeah.
Oh, you can't fly. Yeah, you can't. Right. Yeah, you can't get away.
Yeah.
There's no way out but up, and you can't fly up.
There's always my way. Sorry, there's your Haunted Mansion reference.
Very nice.
It's better if I can get the whole thing in there about the no doors, and
no windows, and no doors,
leaving you this
chilling challenge.
That's right.
To find a way
out. All right.
Anyway,
well, Gandalf, who sounds nothing like the guy.
I have to just point out really quickly. The goblins think these are all fir trees.
You're
They
right.
see 15 birds and 5 fir trees.
5 fir trees, but we know that there's a larch.
There's only 1 fir.
Yeah.
There's 3 pines, and then there's Feely and Keely in the larch.
The larch.
Anyway,
The larch.
the larch.
I'm so sorry.
We're not going to. We've only got 1 more episode to get that out of our system. So let's just make the most of it.
Let's just embrace it and be done with it. You know. All right.
So Gandalf is trying to say something.
Yes, he is. Go away, little boys, shouted Gandalf in answer. It isn't bird nesting time. Also, naughty little boys that play with fire get punished. He said it to make them angry, to show them he was not frightened of them, though, of course, he was, wizard though he was. But they took no notice, and they went on singing. And boy, is this a charming tune. I mean, this is just awful. You like the last one? Check this one out.
Oh, yeah, this is worse than Vogon bad. This is just...
this is just nasty evil.
Shudder.
Burn, burn, tree and fern, shrivel and scorch a fizzling torch to light the night for our delight, yea! Bake and toast 'em, fry and roast 'em, till beards blaze and eyes glaze, till hair smells and skins crack, fat melts and bones black, in cinders lie beneath the sky. So dwarves shall die and light the night for our delight, yea, harry, hey, yahoy.
And with that yahoy, the flames were under Gandalf's tree. In a moment it spread to the others. The bark caught fire. The lower branches cracked. Then Gandalf climbed to the top of his tree. The sudden splendor flashed from his wand like lightning as he got ready to spring down from on high right among the spears of the goblins. That would have been the end of him, though he would probably have killed many of them as he came hurtling down like a thunderbolt. But he never leaped. Just at that moment, the Lord of the Eagles swept down from above, seized him in his talons, and was gone. Wow.
What a song.
Okay.
I mean,
what a song. Yeah, I mean,
gruesome.
we'll get to the Eagles, we'll get to Gandalf, but what a nasty, cruel, evil little song. I mean, very, very morbid. You know,
You pointed out that it attacks all senses, doesn't it?
it does. It does. You've got the visual about the light. You've got the smell of the hair. You've got the feel of the skins cracking. Oh,
Yeah.
man. I mean, the sound,
The sound, yeah.
the sight,
Cracking
the
of the
smell,
skins,
all of this.
The bones blackening, lying in cinders.
Yeah. Oh,
And of
this
course,
is just terrible.
It really is. It is a full sensory assault.
I mean, until beards blaze and eyes glaze.
Oh,
That's just,
it's gruesome.
it is. It's like Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know,
Yeah,
eyes
the
glaze.
Nazis at
That's
the
all
end,
I can
yeah.
think of is that
Yeah,
scene at the
yeah.
end. This is horrible.
It's graphic and it's just awful. It's
I have to admit, this is another one of those things where I'm kind of surprised Peter Jackson didn't do something with the original material because he could have. I mean,
Yeah.
he's a horror guy. This would have been a perfect
Yeah.
thing for him to
Yeah.
create like a visual of this song come to life. But I can't imagine, you know, Azog's, you know, black speech talking goblins that all too serious about themselves actually singing a song.
no, they had no poetry in them.
No musical talent whatsoever.
No. But speaking of their musical talent, you had a really fantastic insight about this.
Yeah, it made me think. We talked about the Tralalalali elves, my personal favorite elves. And if you believe that,
you've come a long way. You actually appreciate them more than you did.
I actually do appreciate them. I think you really talked me into that. Your Prancing Pony Pondering helped, but it was when we got to that chapter and you talked about just how much they celebrate life with this sort of childlike purity. Well, this reminded me of that. This is a similarly childlike purity, but instead of celebrating life, they're celebrating death.
Yeah.
This is the same sort of childlike glee that the elves have about all pleasant things in the world and about life itself. The goblins have about tormenting their enemies. But it's that same purity of joy. It's just wicked to think that anybody could have that purity of joy.
Yeah.
In something like this.
That's a brilliant catch. I mean, it's because it's childlike. But then it becomes cruel. And it's like
twisted.
How cruel children can be, and more so. I haven't known too many kids who are this cruel.
Well, yeah.
But instead of childlike and playful, it's just childish and cruel.
Yeah.
And it's a really good catch, and I think a very deliberate inversion. Especially
so
even down to some of the nonsense lyrics. Instead of the tra-la-la-lally, you've got the yah-hey and the yahari-hey.
And those last lines, they sound like nonsense, but they're very distinctly orcish nonsense. There's something that seemed very familiar about those lines. So I went to The Lord of the Rings at the end of the Two Towers. And if you look at the orcs from Cirith Ungol, when they lift up Frodo's body and Sam is pausing, there's a wild clamor, hooting and laughing as something was lifted from the ground. Yahoy, Yahari hoy, up, is what those orcs say.
Okay.
So this is very, orcish, if you will.
That's interesting, because, I've always thought of it as just sort of like kind of like a work song,
Well, yeah, actually, this kind of reminds me of almost like a sea shanty.
Exactly, yeah. I was thinking exactly that, and maybe it's the, hoy sounds like ahoy, but I mean that.
I think so, yeah.
But the hoy, the word ahoy actually comes from a cattle driving call. So it's a work song. It was a work song before it was specifically a sailing song. So it does kind of strike me as sort of a marching song, a work song.
Right.
And that's kind of what I thought. But it's interesting that the orcs use exactly, or almost exactly, these words in Lord of the Rings.
I know, so very close.
Yeah.
Yahari hoy instead of Yahari hey.
Yeah.
But and Yahoy is spelled H-O-I instead of H-O-Y in in the Lord of the Rings version.
Okay.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, clearly the same thing, and I'm sure Tolkien was thinking about this when he wrote that into Lord of the Rings.
Right. He was thinking of this when he wrote that, not the other way around, I suspect. But yeah.
That's
pretty good stuff.
I don't know if I said that, but that's what I meant to say.
No, you did. I just want to make sure people understood that's what you said. We have a tendency to be able to be misunderstood.
Yes, that's true.
But Gandalf,
we pride ourselves on being clear, but we're not always.
No, we're not. No matter how long we take to try to clarify things,
we will take a long time.
We will. We'll just usually muddy the waters even further.
Yep.
Gandalf. What about Gandalf, huh?
About to sacrifice himself. I mean, that's big, and this is it's a blink and you miss it moment that he's about to do this.
And he's about ready to die, and he knows it.
He's ready to die here, and that makes me think that maybe there is a little bit of Iluvatar stepping in and making sure the Eagles get there right at the right time. He's like, no, you've got work to do. No, you're not going to kill yourself.
And trust me, you will still die at some point.
Right.
I mean, but not.
And
yet.
I will send you back then too.
Yeah. But this time you're going to do it without coming all the way out.
You're not going to do it. You're not going to die for this.
No. This is not that.
Nope.
Even though they're directly related, this is not that.
Right.
And that's pretty amazing when you think about it. I mean, if you look to, Fellowship of the Ring, when Gandalf sacrifices himself in order that the company might escape Moria, and we know that Gandalf ends up. I mean, we're going to go too far afield, so we won't go into this yet. We'll do this when we hit Fellowship of the Ring.
Sure.
We know he goes out of time. He ends up out of time.
Yeah,
so we know
out of
that
thought and time. Yeah.
Yeah, and Iluvatar himself sends him back.
Yeah.
Enhanced and as Gandalf the White, essentially, with more power.
Right.
But
Tolkien
not going to do that twice.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, it's worth noting for anybody who's not familiar with it. Tolkien has made it very clear in letters that it was Iluvatar himself who sent Gandalf back.
Yeah,
and
the Valar may have sent the Astari in the first place, but it was Iluvatar who sent back Gandalf himself after his death, and he did die because we know that they can. That's the whole point. They were in mortal
because they are
bodies.
incarnate. Yeah,
yeah, in flesh. They're not in their Maiar form.
Right.
But we digress. So the eagles arrive. Bum, ba, ba.
Yay.
Lord of the Eagles seizes him in his
got
talons.
the A-Team theme in my head. Or the E-Team, whatever.
The A-Team?
Yeah.
Bum, bum, bum.
That's the one.
Ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-da-dum, bum. See, I'm in a much higher plane because I'm hearing the Lord of the Eagles sweeping down, and I'm hearing like Ride of the Valkyries.
Oh, well, you're just classier than I am, I guess.
Oh, of course. Classier. Well played, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Eagles arrive.
We digress.
So far we digress. And yet without anywhere near the humor of the GPS segment from 2 episodes ago.
No, that lightning is not going to strike
I'm still
twice.
playing that in the car and just absolutely laughing.
Me too.
I can't even stop laughing.
I hate to admit how much I cracked myself up and how much we cracked me up.
We had some good ones there. I mean, it's a shame that it's taken us, 60 some odd episodes to get to the point
actually
where
be
we're really
funny. I know. Yeah.
But, we eventually got there. Oh, goodness. Okay, so goblins, none too pleased about the eagles.
No.
We're not going to read that next little bit, but we see what happens. The wolves are yammering and gnashing. The goblins are yelling. They're throwing their spears in the air. The eagles are driving them away. And I love this. You caught this, too, that their talons tore at goblin faces. That made you think of something, didn't it?
Yeah, that made me think of chapter 18 of the Silmarillion when
One of our
Morgoth
favorite moments.
was attacked by Thorondor. Thorondor came hasting from his eyrie among the peaks of the Chrysaegrim, and he stooped upon Morgoth and marred his face. Just very visual image of eagles just coming down and just
shredding,
mangling your face with their talons. Yeah, that's so cool.
That is such a cool moment. Much smaller scale here, tearing goblin faces.
The quantity over quality on this one. more goblins.
Very good point. So they're all being picked up by this particular express bus and being taken someplace. Yeah. So, in fact, I'm going to let you take that next reading.
Okay.
So we can get where we're going.
All right. At the best of times, heights made Bilbo giddy. He used to turn queer if he looked over the edge of quite a little cliff, and he had never liked ladders, let alone trees, never having had to escape from wolves before. So you can imagine how his head swam now when he looked down between his dangling toes and saw the dark lands opening wide underneath him, touched here and there with the light of the moon on a hillside rock or a stream in the plains. The pale peaks of the mountains were coming nearer, moonlit spikes of rock sticking out of black shadows. Summer or not, it seemed very cold. He shut his eyes and wondered if he could hold on any longer. Then he imagined what would happen if he did not. He felt sick.
Yeah.
The flight ended only just in time for him, just before his arms gave way. He loosed Dory's ankles with a gasp and fell onto the rough platform of an eagle's eyrie. There he lay without speaking, and his thoughts were a mixture of surprise at being saved from the fire and fear lest he fall off that narrow place into the deep shadows on either side.
Yeah, that would not be my favorite moment.
No.
I'll admit I'm rather like Bilbo when it comes with heights. I love being maybe, on a high mountain or on a cliff, but not near the edge, please. No, not the edge.
I like the vantage point, being up there and seeing all that, seeing the beautiful scenery. But as soon as I become really aware of just how high up I am, and
if I'm a body length away from the edge,
that freaks me out.
That's enough for me.
Yeah,
and I can't even imagine dangling from the bottom of a very large bird,
clinging onto Dory's ankles.
Actually, really, not clinging onto a bird, but clinging onto a dwarf.
Yeah, because they almost missed him. They picked up all the dwarves, and
I'm sure Gandalf would have said, "Excuse me, you have one more."
Oh, for sure, yeah, but it's not like he's got the first class seat on this flight.
No, he doesn't. No, he does not. This is definitely economy. This is like the folded seat.
Yeah,
this
right.
This is the jump seat.
Yeah, exactly.
Right there by the bathroom at the back. I mean, it's just miserable flight the whole time.
And the noise of the engines and everything.
Oh, man. And seriously, if you're in the wrong spot when that bird... I'm just going to...
Oh, man. Yeah. You thought sitting by the bathroom was bad. Try being the bathroom.
Try being the... That's right. Oh goodness! So they do make it. I love his little line, and we're not going to read it, but yeah, I'll read it. Now I know what a piece of bacon feels like when it's suddenly picked out of the pan on a fork.
I love
and put
that.
back on the shelf. I love that. First of all,
great.
I've never done that. I've never in my life taken a piece of bacon out of the pan and put it back anywhere.
No, if it's going in the pan, it's going in my mouth soon after.
That's right. It is darn well. I have not wasted any bacon. I don't know
No.
what planet he's from, but
No.
It is a great line, though, isn't it?
Whoever looked at a pan full of bacon and said, you know what? Nope, I've got one too many pieces of bacon
That's
here.
right. That's too much. I got to take some out.
Nope, not me.
Things that have never happened for 500, Alex.
Quite right.
You
But
are
it's great
not
that it's a
kidding.
breakfast metaphor, isn't it?
Isn't it? Breakfast metaphors are always the best.
Yeah.
They
And
really
so
are.
Hobbity, so Bilbo.
Oh yeah,
so
that's
Baggins-y.
very Hobbity. And then, then he slips up with this little Freudian thing here that he talks about after Dory says eagles aren't forks. And he goes, not a bit like storks. Forks, I mean.
I know. I love that. It's so fun. I mean, I kind of think maybe they just can't quite hear each other over the rushing wind. But then at the same time, it was Bilbo who first said fork anyway. So I don't. Maybe
Well,
you're right.
yeah, I
Maybe it's
mean-
just a Freudian slip.
I think it might be. Then he's all anxious about the eagle, like, did I say something wrong? And,
Yeah.
You know, don't be rude to an eagle.
You ought
when
not
you're
to
as
be
small
rude
as
to
a
an
hobbit.
eagle. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm actually, because I've got a couple of things that I want to read towards the end, or because I've got the one thing at the end I want to read, I actually have you taking the next passage as well. So if you could take
that's
on
right. Yeah, that is
that,
me. All right.
that would be awesome.
Okay. The eagle came back, seized him in his talons by the back of his coat, and swooped off. This time he flew only a short way. Very soon Bilbo was laid down, trembling with fear, on a wide shelf of rock on the mountainside. There was no path down onto it save by flying, and no path down off it except by jumping over a precipice. There he found all the others sitting with their backs to the mountain wall.
Securely, I might add.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
I know.
I'm
No path
sitting
down except by
here.
flying, and no path down except by jumping. Well,
Yeah.
that's not a path.
Yeah, that's
there are
not
no
a place
paths.
I'm going to sit. Thank
No,
you very
that's
much.
right. The Lord of the Eagles also was there and was speaking to Gandalf. It seemed that Bilbo was not going to be eaten after all. The wizard and the Eagle Lord appeared to know one another slightly, and even to be on friendly terms. As a matter of fact, Gandalf, who had often been in the mountains, had once rendered a service to the eagles and healed their lord from an arrow wound. So you see, prisoners had meant prisoners rescued from the goblins only, and not captives of the eagles.
Ah, well, that's good.
Thanks for clearing that up.
Yeah.
As Bilbo listened to the talk of Gandalf, he realized that at last they were going to escape really and truly from the dreadful mountains. He was discussing plans with the great eagle for carrying the dwarves and himself and Bilbo far away, and setting them down well on their journey across the plains below.
I love that. And I know we didn't read far enough early to catch that initial confusion, but you know,
About
the
prisoners,
confusion
yeah.
between take your prisoners to the Lord of the Eagles bids you to bring your prisoners.
Right. And
Are we prisoners now?
he had just strength to wonder what the messenger had meant by prisoners. Yeah.
Yeah. By the
Also
way, I
another
love
rabbit
that-
comparison.
Another rabbit
Another rabbit
reference.
similarity.
Yeah. To begin to think of being torn up for supper like a rabbit. So even he is now thinking of himself
thinking of
in the
himself like a
context of a rabbit.
Yeah.
That might be the first for that. But what a visual, this wide shelf of rock that has absolutely nothing down. You know, there's no path. You can only get there by air. And there's no way off it except by jumping over to your certain doom. So they might as well be prisoners. They're not going anywhere.
They're not going anywhere.
So Gandalf knows the Eagle Lord, and just like the Elven King isn't named, the Eagle Lord isn't named, but it is, like you said, probably Gwaihir.
Probably Gwaihir, yeah.
Just given the timing, and in this case, it's more like they're kind of returning the favor to Gandalf. It does seem, that's why I think I
that's
initially
true.
thought less Manway and more, self-interest. But
Yeah.
Ratliff's investigation points that out a little bit better. So I'm grateful for that.
Well, maybe again. I mean, I think they are the eagles of Manway, but even soldiers in Manway's army.
They're still going to certainly appreciate.
They're still going to have a certain amount of freedom to do what they want.
That is true.
They're not constantly doing. It doesn't mean they're always doing Manway's bidding. I think there was one time. I don't know if I said this on the show or if it's just something maybe we talked about or we posted about on Facebook somewhere, but I even started to wonder at one point if things like the eagles and the Ents were just manifestations of the will of the Vala who
Right.
who created them. In this
Right,
case,
of
the eagles
Manwë
being
or Yavanna
manifestations of Manwë's will. That's clearly not the case here.
No,
They
no.
clearly have their own free will. They have their own identities, and
Yeah.
and they can make their own deals. Gandalf
Yeah.
has done them a favor; they're doing him a favor back.
Absolutely.
I still think that there could be a bit of Iluvatar in them arriving right when they did.
The timing is more than fortuitous. One might say lucky.
Right? Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think that whole thing about them being, kind of extensions of Manwë comes from our earlier thinking, where I think we were really stuck trying to put every entity into its proper box,
Into a classification, yeah.
into an existing classification, and I think we finally, in which case the eagles were like, Maiar spirits. Which I think we've eventually come to the conclusion that that's not the case, and that there must just be some sort of undefined classification of spirits lesser than the Maiar, that are not necessarily Ainur. That is to say, they were not necessarily offspring of Iluvatar's thought.
Right.
I don't know how that fits in. There's nothing there. But
There's
I think
nothing to go on. There's no.
nothing. Not in
nothing
histories. Not in anything.
Right. We'd
not
have
even
to
in the
go
letters.
to other texts. We'd have to go to things, old versions of things that we don't usually go to
Right,
find
right.
any kind of indication of that. And I'm not really
No,
prepared
I'm
to do
I'm
that
not
here.
comfortable with that. But
No.
the idea is just of speculating with the idea that, if they don't fit into the Ainur, puzzle piece, if they're not Maiar, then what are they? I think we just have to be comfortable with the fact that we don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we've come to grips with over the course of 60 plus episodes, is that there are things we don't know. Well, certainly, if we're not comfortable with that idea yet, we better get there before Fellowship of the Ring, because Tom Bombadil will make us
Well, and
very,
even things
very
like,
familiar with the idea of mystery.
even things like the sentient fox in Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings. That's
yeah.
sort of the last gasp of this kind of thing that we see in Lord of the Rings happens with this fox. And I think we talked about this in the last episode, or was it in the
think we did.
postscript to the last episode, where we talked about this fox who observes the hobbits leaving, and we get a little bit of the fox's inner monologue.
Right.
It's a fox. It's it's not anything more than that.
No,
but
it's an animal.
It's an animal, and so maybe there is room in Tolkien's world for certain animals to have a kind of sentience. Where
Yeah.
that comes from, we don't know, but it's there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not all. I don't think it's all,
No.
but certainly some.
Yeah. Good point. By the way, I also want to give you kudos because you pronounced airy correctly. I think the last time I had that word, I butchered it and called it airy. That's wrong. It is airy. The eagle's airy.
Well, we've done a little research on that, and
Well,
constantly improving.
Trying
Always.
to.
Always.
It's easy.
Always-
it's a low bar, Sean.
always
it's a low
improving.
bar.
Always
It's really
improving
easy to
ourselves.
improve when
It
you
is
start
true.
out where we
Yeah.
started, right?
It's like goblin poetry.
There you go. All right. Well, first off, I don't know if anybody else has the piece of art in their book that I have in mind, but right here in the middle of the chapter is one of Tolkien's own illustrations, the Misty Mountains looking west from the Eyrie towards Goblin Gate. I love that. That's just a beautiful shot. And you can
It's
see
a
fir
cool
trees
piece of
and
art. Yeah.
pine trees, and I don't see the larch in that particular shot. But
No,
I could
those
be
are
wrong.
fir trees. I learned that from the Flora of Middle Earth.
Yep. 5 fir trees there, actually, in the foreground.
Wow, there are, aren't there?
Yeah.
I wonder if
Those might be the trees. They very
maybe
well
those
might.
are the 5 trees.
Well, or that's what they were before they got burned to the ground.
Aw, I'm sad for the trees now, and I love that you see the eagle in flight in that picture.
I know. Isn't that cool? I love it. I love seeing Tolkien's own work, by the way. Some of my favorite things to look at are the books like, J.R.R. Tolkien, Artist and Illustrator, or The Art of the Hobbit and The Art of the Lord of the Rings that Hammond and Skull put together. I love seeing Tolkien's own work.
We've got there's actually an image of this on our website on the show notes to episode 64.
That's right.
We just
That's
put
right.
that
there
up.
is.
Yep.
I'd forgotten about that.
And so we've got that up. Remind me, is there a color version of this somewhere? Is it in one of the
I think
one
there
of the
is.
Hammond and Skull books?
I think there is.
Maybe a watercolor or something.
Yeah, I don't recall for sure. I'll try to find that and see if that's something that we can legitimately share on the website in their show notes.
Yeah.
So
But we've got this picture, the black and white from the book.
Yeah, it's a line drawing in the book.
Yeah, the line drawing. Thank you. The line drawing is up on our show notes. But yeah, if you can find the color version, it's. I feel like there is a color version that I've seen.
I know, I do too. I can't.
And I can imagine it being really beautiful. But
of course. Well, we don't. We're not going to read the actual plan, but we do hear some very interesting things about the nature of the eagles here, as Gwai here discusses with Gandalf what they're going to do. And he tells them that they're going to shoot at us if we get too close to the men because they think that we'd be after their sheep, and they'd be right.
At other times they would be right. Yeah,
and that's we talked about the fact that they don't always ally with the good. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean they're bad. It means they're eagles and they eat sheep. Mm-hmm. So, does that mean that men are bad because they're shooting at eagles and eagles are good? No, it just means that they have a conflict of interest.
It's just the circle of life.
Oh.
I am not going to sing that song. Sorry.
No, I will not be singing that either.
But yeah, it's a good reminder.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that these are animals. These are wild animals. These are creatures that are going to be, from time to time, opposed to man because of what men want to keep sheep for their wool, and eagles think they taste good. So that's a conflict.
And they specifically say, we're glad to cheat the goblins, we're glad to repay our thanks, but we will not risk ourselves for dwarves.
I love that. Plains. We will not risk ourselves for dwarves in the Southward Plains. It makes you wonder, is there anybody they would risk themselves for?
I wonder.
Somebody higher up the food chain, so to speak, the dwarves?
Yeah.
Maybe they would risk themselves for Gandalf alone, but not for the dwarves.
Maybe so, yeah. Or maybe if Gandalf were on a different errand. If he weren't if he weren't working with the dwarves.
Right, exactly. Right. Well, either way, Gandalf's perfectly happy to just go wherever they'll take him. I mean, really, if a free air taxi is going to take you someplace, as long as it's closer to your destination than you are now, you're perfectly fine.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I love that he's willing to say, look, we really are hungry. Can you help us out a little bit? Mm-hmm. And I love this. I'm going to go ahead and read then the last two paragraphs of the chapter, and then we'll discuss. Later on, you might have seen a bright fire on the shelf of rock, and the figures of the dwarves round it cooking and making a fine roasting smell. The eagles had brought up dry boughs for fuel, and they had brought rabbits, hares, and a small sheep. The dwarves managed all the preparations. Bilbo was too weak to help, and anyway, he was not much good at skinning rabbits or cutting up meat, being used to having it delivered by the butcher all ready to cook. Very, very Bagginsy right there, isn't it?
Very, very.
Gandalf, too, was lying down after doing his part in setting the fire going, since Owen and Glóin had lost their tinder boxes. Dwarves have never taken to matches even yet. So ended the adventures of the Misty Mountains. Soon Bilbo's stomach was feeling full and comfortable again, and he felt he could sleep contentedly, though really he would have liked a loaf and butter better than bits of meat toasted on sticks. He slept curled up on the hard rock more soundly than ever he had done on his feather bed in his own little hole at home. But all night he dreamed of his own house and wandered in his sleep into all his different rooms, looking for something that he could not find, nor remember what it looked like. I love that. I love that whole thing.
That is a great
the visual representation and the smells. You can almost smell the food.
Yeah.
And I love that, Bilbo, of course, knows that he can't help, so he's not doing anything. Gandalf's I've already done my bit. I'm lying down.
Well, it's interesting. He's used to meat delivered by a butcher. He's
very civilized.
Even though he's about to have this great feast, he's out of his comfort zone. He's not. He's not able to create a feast from wild animals caught and killed. In the wild.
No, he has absolutely no merit badges for the Boy Scouts.
No, he's not good. He's not going to be able to skin and butcher a rabbit, unlike Sam Gamgee, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. You wonder if there's part of that's just like the class divide sort of thing.
I don't doubt it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bilbo's a Baggins. He's
upper class. He's going to buy all his meat from the butcher. It's going to come, all ready to go, cured probably as well, for that matter, so that it can hang around in his pantries in his larder. Yeah. With the thrall.
Wow, I'd forgotten about that.
Oh man, I remember that vividly. I don't know why, but I just remember that part about the big cold stone, the thermal mass in there. But I also, by the way, said Owen and Glóin in honor of you because you taught me to do that.
Thank you.
Even though I'm still not convinced, I just
I would not give you a hard time if you said Owen and Glóin. I know it's It's kind of
I think the only reason
controversial,
I don't,
but I just
the one thing you got me on was when the Tolkien kids were coming up with rhyming names.
Right, and they came up with
and
names
the fact
like,
that they didn't come up with groin is pretty good evidence that his name is Glowin.
That was the thing that cinched it for me. It was like,
Yeah, that pretty much did it for me too.
I totally would have come up with groin, but no, they came up with and loin,
Yeah, definitely.
But no, they came up with blowing and growing and
right. Ones that
I
would
don't think
rhyme
they
with Owen and Glowin.
yeah.
So, Bilbo is finally full. Though you know what it's like
dwarves
when you
have never
haven't eaten... Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say this thing about the dwarves they've never taken to matches, because we talked a little bit about the sort of anachronistic mention of Bilbo's matches in Chapter 5.
Yeah.
And I think we mentioned this passage here. There's not a ton to say about it, but it's there is a bit of an anachronism in Bilbo's matches, and but a little reminder: if Bilbo has matches, if matches are a thing in Tolkien's world,
right.
Note that dwarves still don't use them. Dwarves
That's
are
right.
still
I don't take for those newfangled matches.
Right, exactly. They'd rather just use a tinderbox.
Yeah, because that's so much more convenient.
It's probably just it's kind of a macho thing for him, I imagine. It's,
Well, these days they probably have big lighters, and they still won't. They still insist on tinder and flint.
Yeah, like no, we light our fires the old fashioned. This is the way Mahal taught us to teach.
There you go.
Light a fire.
And I love that Bilbo, not a big fan of the meat kebabs, would very much a carb guy. He would have rather gone on a carb loading trick here with a loaf and butter. And you know what? Actually, after 3 days, I can't blame him. Was this the night after the night? It was the night before yesterday. It was the last time they'd eaten. Mm-hmm. If I haven't eaten I certainly have never gone that long, but if I haven't, let's say I missed breakfast and I was too busy working for lunch and I get to dinner and I was like, man, I haven't eaten since 6 o'clock yesterday. I'm starving.
You're craving carbs.
I'm craving carbs. Yeah. I'm not looking to go on a protein binge and eating an entire side of beef, though I probably wouldn't turn it down.
I don't see why we can't just have both.
I know, seriously.
I mean, come on.
Give me the steak and
give me the
bread.
loaf and butter and the bits of meat. I will make a fantastic sandwich.
Amen to that.
I will make a mountainside Hobbit sandwich.
When you're that hungry, though, you feel like you can eat an incredible amount of food, but you can't.
Yeah.
I'm sure he filled up pretty quickly.
True. Well, and one other thing about the loaf and butter is, remember, that's something that you cook at home.
That's true.
I mean, I'm not sure that there's a way to bake a loaf of bread out in the wild.
Well, sourdough, if the 49ers, the gold miners.
That's true.
That's how
true.
sourdough started. Was
I guess if you make some sort of a clay oven or a cave oven or something out, I guess there's ways to do that. But but still, it kind of smacks of civilization more than
much more than meat on sticks. Yeah. Bits of meat toasted on sticks. I love that.
And so it strikes me as a little bit of longing for home. Longing for that civilization.
This is like meat s'mores.
Oh man, that sounds delicious.
Doesn't it?
It totally, yeah. If
I'm
you
sure
had
we
the
just
loaf
turned
and
off
butter,
all the vegans. I apologize to anybody with vegan sensitivities because you have just probably been absolutely revolted by our last discussion.
We are.
But
a
that's
little
okay.
bit
We talked about rare steaks and stuff like that before.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
if you're still with us, then you understand.
We are both meat eaters, but we promise we won't do this more than we have to.
Well, no.
We really have to right now.
We do. We absolutely have to. But what else we have to do is we really have to touch, and not a whole lot of time on this, but touch on this last line. I am just suckered into this idea of this dream. I'm just, I want to know so much more.
Yeah.
And really, there's not anything more to tell.
No, there's not.
There's just our own interpretations, our own speculations. Part of me, I've got to say, I think he's kind of, we talked last chapter, when Bilbo found his way out of the goblin caves and the buttons popped off the waistcoat, which, by the way, I just want to thank all of those who helped me understand that the word that's spelled like it's waistcoat is actually pronounced waistcoat.
Actually waistcoat.
And of course, I knew that, and I don't know why I didn't know that at the time, but I did know that, I swear. So he pops the buttons off his waistcoat, or his vest, for those of us
as we call it in the States, yeah.
And how we talked about that was breaking the baggins.
Right.
I love that phrase that you used. You came up with that, and that was brilliant. I have to say, is he looking for the baggins here? I think he is.
I think he is,
can't remember
too.
what the baggins looks like.
I think he is too. He's left behind, virtually all of the old baggins.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's dreaming of his own house, and wandering into all of his different rooms, I think
Exactly.
underscores for me the idea that he's looking for the Baggins.
For the homie, for the Baggins.
Yeah,
I agree.
he's looking for that homey comfort.
Yeah.
And
you know,
maybe that's the key, is that
safety.
he's looking for the comfort, but for the first time he can't remember what it looked like.
Exactly.
He's been without it for so long, he doesn't even remember,
Yeah, he
what
wouldn't
it's
know
like,
it if
what
he
to look
saw
for.
it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Comfort, safety, all that hominess. Yeah,
I think that's what it is.
I agree. I mean, I'd love to think there's more to it, but I don't think there is.
Well, I think we kicked around some, could it
Yeah.
be the ring, or is it,
Is he look? The other thing I thought of was maybe he's looking for something he doesn't possess, the qualities that he fears he lacks. He's now discovered that he has certain qualities that will help him to be a burglar. Certainly, the ring will help him to be a burglar. But I think he realizes there's still, a long way to go.
Could be.
And maybe there's that. But I think the fact that it's his house and the fact that he's going in all those rooms and that he doesn't remember what it looks like.
The fact that it's something he used to know what it looked like.
Yes, yeah.
That tells me
makes
that it's
think
something that he
Baggins.
had and that is gone, as opposed to something he needs to gain.
It's the Bagginsy comfort. I agree.
And that's what leads me away from thinking maybe it's something more sinister with the ring or something like that, because I don't know. Maybe that's a possibility. I wouldn't really know what to make of that.
I don't think the ring is already playing tricks on his mind. I don't know.
Yeah. You said you don't think?
I don't think, no. No, I
Probably
don't think
not this early. I mean, it's certainly working on
very
him in
early.
certain ways, but
Well, yeah, he's been willing to lie. I mean, right away. But that was in proximity to his most recent use of it,
that
too.
is true. And I just don't really think that fits. I don't really know what, if the ring were playing tricks on him, I don't really know what
it wouldn't be that. What's the advantage to that? Right.
Exactly. What is it getting out of this? No, I think we're on the money with, it's he's looking for the Baggins. He's looking for that old comfort that he's finally left behind. He's on the
really
other side
can't
even of the
even
mountains.
remember.
He's finally escaped the mountains, and now he's kind of past a point of no return here.
He really has. That's true. Boy, if you think he's past the point of no return now, just wait till the next chapter.
Yeah, no kidding.
That was a great discussion, Sean. Thank you. Folks, be sure to join us again next time when we welcome Professor Michael Drought to the Prancing Pony Podcast. Professor Drought is a professor of English at Wheaton College and a noted Tolkien scholar. He's the co-editor of the annual Tolkien Studies Journal, as well as the books J.R.R. Tolkien, Beowulf and the Critics, and the J.R.R. Tolkien Encyclopedia, Scholarship and Critical Assessment, because he can't apparently edit short-titled books. I'm just saying.
He makes this work for...
I mean, it can't just be the JRRT Encyclopedia. It has to be, all of that. But anyway, we are, it's funny. I say
quite a
we're
hefty
really,
book, too.
It is. It's a huge one.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm saying that we're really looking forward to speaking him, but can I just tell you
Through the magic of
time travel.
Recording.
Yeah, and it was an awesome conversation.
It really was. Yeah, we had a good discussion, great discussion with him about just some of the things he's been working on, and what I thought was great was just talking about just some of the things that are going on in the world of Tolkien studies right now. Mm-hmm. Not just the journal Tolkien studies that he edits, but also just what we as readers and students of Tolkien can expect coming
Absolutely.
down in the future. And we even talked a little bit about Beowulf, which was really cool.
Probably not as much as you wanted to, but
No,
you got to
no,
out-nerd me as usual. So,
True.
And after our talk with Professor Drought in episode 67, we'll finally welcome Beorn to the stage when we come back to The Hobbit in Chapter 7, Queer Lodgings.
And I have to say, we've gotten a lot of questions about Beorn, so I can promise that Alan and I will be having some discussions about who he is and where his power comes from and what he's all about. I'm not saying we're going to have any answers, but...
Well, in any case, before we get on to Bartleman's Bag, we want to take a minute to ask you to consider joining our Patreon family at patreon.com/prancingponypod. If, of course, we've earned your support. Yeah, like we've been telling you, Sean and I sink several hours into every episode, and yes, we are happy to do it, but we really are grateful for the resources you provide. It's thanks to our Patreon family that we've not only been able to move to weekly episodes, but make some improvements in how the show is put together. We have another goal to reach, and that's the goal of attending a moot and doing a live episode from there. We are a little over halfway there, almost 60%, but we still have a ways to go, so please consider joining there. And, of course, to make it worth your while, we have some really cool rewards, too, like exclusive content.
Exclusive content like our postscripts to each episode.
Yes.
We record these episodes a couple of weeks in advance, which you've probably now figured out from our references to the Drought interview. And then we listen to those before they release to see if there are any jokes that fell through the cracks, any mistakes we want to correct, mispronunciations, topics we wish we'd delved into a little bit more.
Yeah.
We put all those into a short...
Airy, irie, that kind of thing.
Airy, right, exactly. We usually put those into a short 10 or so minute postscript for each episode that's available to our Patreon supporters.
Absolutely, and that exclusive postscript usually releases the same day as the episode it follows. Though we did try something different with Riddles in the Dark. We combined all 3 postscripts into one very long, uber, mega, super duper postscript, which people loved, by the way.
And we
anyway,
used that as an excuse to go longer than 10 minutes for each episode.
Well,
which was
yeah,
a
I
lot
think
of fun.
that one was almost 40 minutes for that,
I think so,
that
yeah.
postscript. But
Yeah.
we also want to take a moment to thank those of you who have already joined, of course. You really are helping to make the show better. And we want to remember our very special shout-out to Jason in British Columbia, our patron at the Kierdan's Contribution tier. So if you want a personalized shout-out on our episodes, now you know where to go.
And while we really do appreciate your support, we do not want you to feel obligated. Only if you can afford it, and only if you think we've earned it, do we want you to consider signing up. Otherwise, keep enjoying the podcast, because we'll keep making it.
Absolutely. So, Sean, I know Bartleman has something in his bag for us today. What have we got?
We've got a few short ones today that I thought would be kind of fun to tackle together.
Okay.
In honor of the heroic wizardry we've seen on display from Mr. Gandalf the Grey today, I want to start
Mr.
with...
Gandalf?
Mr. Gandalf. Yeah, I wanted to start with a question from Katie M. in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Katie wrote in saying, when the Astari, or wizards, first came to the western shores of Middle-earth, did they appear as seemingly portrayed in the movies, or did they actually age, as I believe it is mentioned in one of the passages in the Silmarillion? She says, I remember Saruman being described as having dark hair, which makes me think of one of the Noldor, and Gandalf as seeming the least of the 5. The Astari have always intrigued me, so I'd love to know what you have to say about this. Well, Katie, I can answer this one pretty easily, actually. The Silmarillion says of the Astari that in the likeness of men they appeared, old but vigorous, and they changed little with the years, and aged but slowly. So they certainly did age slowly.
But slowly. Yeah.
And they were
I wish
always
I could say
old.
the same, Katie. I wish
no
I could
kidding.
say the same.
Yeah, having small children is making me feel like I'm aging, but quickly.
Yeah.
But they appeared, but they also appeared old, and I think that's worth talking about.
Yeah,
which
they
I'll get to in
started
a
out
minute.
that way.
Yeah.
Hale, if I remember correctly.
I think so, yeah.
Old
Now,
but
that
hale.
same paragraph also says that Saruman, or Curanir, was the eldest and came first. In the Unfinished Tales, we get the additional detail that they were never young. So, I'm getting the picture that when they arrived,
I
they
want
all...
to be forever young. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Please forgive me.
I'm getting the picture that when they arrived, they all looked like older men. Not elderly, as we imagine them being in the War of the Ring.
So a little
but,
salt and pepper,
Yeah, older, kind of like us.
Oh, wow. I hope for their sake they were already older than us, but...
But what I'm imagining is, remember, they were in Middle-earth for 2,000 years. Probably
True,
after that time, they looked a few years older.
Probably.
But, they aged slowly. So, one should not imagine, I guess the key is that you shouldn't imagine that they looked like young men in their prime when they arrived.
No. And as for Gandalf seeming the least of the 5, that's also in Unfinished Tales. It says specifically that last came one who seemed the least, less tall than the others, and in looks more aged, gray-haired and gray-clad, and leaning on a staff. But Círdan from their first meeting at the Grey Havens divined in him the greatest spirit and the wisest, and he welcomed him with reverence, and he gave to his keeping the 3rd ring, Narya the Red. So he did seem the oldest, even though Saruman was actually the oldest, and he also seemed the weakest of them, except to those who were wise enough to see his true nature, like Círdan and like another ring bearer, Galadriel, who wanted Gandalf to be the leader of the White Council. So
That's right, yeah.
I think that just about covers it. Sean, what else do we have?
Well, I want to make one more comment about Gandalf as a segue to our next question. For anybody who didn't hear our earlier episode on this, and I'm thinking of episode 007 on the Valaquenta.
Boy, that does go back quite a ways. There are going to be some folks who haven't heard that.
Quite a bit. That's getting into the rough episodes. But,
Boy, isn't it? Yeah, the rough episodes.
but
also
remember,
known as most of season 1.
Right. Oh, no. We hit our stride.
But those first 10 or 12 were
Those first 10 or 12
choppy.
were pretty rough. But remember that in Valinor, Gandalf, or Olorin as his name was, had dwelt in Lorien, but his ways took him off into the house of Nienna, and of her he learned pity and patience.
Yeah.
So what we learned from that is that Olorin, or Gandalf, was originally one of the Maiar of both Nienna and Irmo Lorien, the master of visions and dreams. There's actually an early draft of the Valaquenta that's in Morgoth's Ring, where we learn a little bit about the work that Olorin did for Lorien. It says he was a counselor of Irmo, secret enemy of the secret evils of Melkor, for his bright visions drove away the imaginations of darkness.
Ooh, I love that.
This is so cool to me because it tells us that Olorin was fighting for the good guys long before he ever assumed the identity of Gandalf. He wasn't just working for good, he was fighting. He was fighting
Yeah.
the fight.
From the very beginning. Man, that's a really cool find, Sean. I'd actually completely forgotten about that. I was thinking more about the information from Unfinished Tales, where we learned that Manwë wanted to send 3 emissaries, as he put it, mighty, peers of Sauron, who would become incarnate and help the elves and men against Sauron. Aule chose Saruman, at that time named Kurumo, and Orome sent Alatar, one of the blue wizards, of whom we learn nothing else, essentially.
That's right, yeah.
But it's Manwë himself that wants Olorin. And it's funny because Olorin says he's too weak and that he's afraid of Sauron. Yet it's that typical Gandalf humility that leads Manwë to choose him. Man.
And boy, didn't that turn out to be the right choice.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I swear, there are times I think we could do a whole episode just on Gandalf. But, who knows?
Maybe we should consider that
Maybe
someday.
we will. Maybe one of our special Patreon episodes. Who knows,
so.
What will be chosen for the next few quarters. But,
yeah.
Sean, what else do we have?
Well, our next question comes from Ashley M. in Manchester, the UK. Ashley wrote in asking some questions about Gandalf's old boss, Irmo Lorien.
Well, hence your nice little segue. Yeah.
That's why I mentioned him, yep. Now, I mean, the truth is, although he's called the master of visions and dreams, he really doesn't do that much in the Legendarium. I mean, we've hardly ever talked about him. He's rarely mentioned in the Silmarillion. Even in History of Middle-earth, with all the expanded material that's there's not really a lot about him. But at any rate, Ashley asked, I recently listened to your podcast on the Ainur of Arda and their different characteristics and personalities. I was fascinated about your thoughts on Irmo Lorien and the roles he plays in Arda, from creation to the passing of the ages. Do you think Irmo played a role in the War of the Ring?
Huh.
And Ashley specifically mentions the dream. Remember the dream that came to Faramir and Boromir that ended up sending Boromir to Rivendell? I won't read the whole thing, but it's the one about, seek for the sword that was broken, Isildur's bane shall waken, and the Halfling force shall stand.
Yeah. Love that piece.
It's a great poem, and obviously full of portent.
Yep.
So
and
going back
mannish.
to Ashley's...
I remember when we...
That's true, we talked about how
did,
mannish poetry is
Tolkien Reading
usually,
Day.
Yeah.
And how it's very... Yeah, I'd go back to
mannish
that one.
poetry so often conveys information, whether it's prophecies or history and things like that, yeah.
Really cool stuff.
So going back to Ashley's question, Ashley says, we know Manwë plays a role in the War of the Ring with the Eagles.
Right.
And so does Eru Ilúvatar when sending Gandalf back to play his role. Wow, it's like we knew we were going to ask this question.
Seriously.
We really did not plan that.
I didn't, no.
Would you think it is possible that Irmo was sending visions to men and influencing events through dreams? I always thought it was a cool theory. Maybe I'm totally wrong, but it would be interesting to see what you guys think. I got to say, it's interesting. It's a really interesting theory. I think, it could be possible, but
sure.
Alan, I wanted to get your thoughts on this. Why don't you take this one first?
Well, certainly it would be speculative, but, there are several times in the Legendarium that the Valar send messages to people in dreams. Sometimes it's clear. The text actually tells us who's sending the message. I think, for example, of Finrod and Turgon, we read that Ulmo laid a deep sleep upon them in heavy dreams, which, that's what led them to found Nargothrond and Gondolin.
Right.
Other times it's not as clear. The shade of Gorlam appears to Beren in his dream. Or more recently, we just had Bilbo having a dream in the cave that alerted him to the crack in the wall. So
that's right.
I don't know if that's Irmo or not. It's
I don't know. I mean, it seems
not clear.
It really isn't clear. We can only speculate. It does seem possible that maybe any time a character has a dream or a vision that isn't otherwise explained, maybe Irmo Lorien is behind it.
That's not unreasonable.
I even wonder if he may have a role in the dream Ulmo sent to Finrod and Turgon. I mean, we know that the message was Ulmo's, right? But given that Ulmo is not the master of visions and dreams, and Irmo is, I almost wonder, and this is just totally speculating, but I wonder if, does Ulmo have to bring the message to Irmo to send it? Is Irmo like a telegraph operator for the Valar, sending visions to characters? I don't know. I wonder.
Boy, talk about having to be careful. You can't afford a transcription error there. You want me to found what city? I'm sorry, Fondlin? You want me to found that
what
where?
Fondlin?
I don't know. Man. Isn't the text? I know. Hey, if I'm going to get a second reference to that in, I'm going to.
Hidden city. Stop.
Just stop.
Keep away, creepy nephew. Stop.
Keep away, creepy nephew. Definitely. But isn't that text in Silmarillion that Ulmo laid a deep sleep upon them and heavy dreams?
Yeah, that's true.
So, I mean, it is
maybe
pretty
that,
specific.
Maybe that was
I don't
more
know.
Ulmo.
But I hear what you're saying. I mean, in
It's
other
very
words,
interesting.
is it sort of like they have to go through Irmo because it's a dream? I don't know.
I wonder.
That's a good question.
I don't know.
That's a good question.
All speculation. There's just not really anything about Irmo in any of the texts, unfortunately.
No, not really.
One other cool thing I did find about Irmo when I was looking for this that I thought was neat and I wanted to bring up. Tolkien at one point in one of his manuscripts made a note that Namo Mandas represented judgment of what is, and Irmo Lorien represented desire of what might be or should be.
Ooh.
Now remember, these two were brothers.
Right.
Irmo and Namo were brothers. I wonder if Tolkien was developing an idea that never really quite took off about, maybe the interplay of fate and free will, with maybe Mandos being the one who pronounces what's fated, what's doomed already, and maybe Lorien being the one who tries to influence things when doom isn't certain, sending messages and visions to make characters make the right choice. I'm that's just,
pure speculation.
Top of my head, but I don't know. I kind of like it.
Yeah, I like the concept. I mean, it's certainly another way to demonstrate that tension between fate and free will, and it fits, what Tolkien has said, but it's certainly speculative. That's all we have.
Yeah, completely speculative, but fun to speculate, and really, I think that's pretty much everything that there is to say about Irmo Lorien.
Yeah, it is. We will not be doing an episode on Irmo Lorien.
Sadly, no. There just isn't enough there.
It'll be like a 7-minute episode.
Yeah. So finally, we've got one more question from David P. in Virginia. And this question came to us on Facebook, and we actually did answer David directly, but I thought it was a good question that was worth bringing up on the show.
Sure.
It's jumping ahead a little bit in The Hobbit, but since we're talking about dreams and visions and prophecies, I figured now's a good place to talk about it. So David said, I just finished episode 57, 'Tis a Silly Place, and was wondering what you two think of the prophecy, stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks, and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's Day will shine upon the keyhole. Clearly, this is a future telling of a very specific event at a very specific time.
True.
My question is, who gave the prophecy? Iluvatar or one of the Valar? And who did they give it to write?
Huh. This is a fun one. Of course, we absolutely have to speculate, but that's what we do here. That's why they pay us the big bucks. I actually was leaning towards Aule or one of his Maiar, since he's the one who created the dwarves. But then, Sean, you and I were talking about it later, and you suggested that given the role Iluvatar plays throughout Bilbo's adventure, that maybe it was Iluvatar himself who sent the prophecy, and maybe he sent it through Aule or one of his Maiar.
Could be, yeah. And then honestly, after researching Irmo Lorien for this episode, I started to wonder if maybe Irmo was, the telegraph operator there sending it on Iluvatar's behalf or Aule's behalf. And, not that we know that this prophecy necessarily came in a dream, but I would think it was probably a vision to someone.
Well,
although I think you found something maybe a little contradictory on that, didn't you?
Yeah, Rateliff had something to say about it, and I'm going to go ahead and read a quick paragraph from him. The size and coloration, not to mention longevity, of the Lonely Mountain thrush indicates that he is an exceptional individual. But then Thorin does identify him as a member of, quote, a long-lived and magical breed, or in the final text, a long-lived and magical race. It seems very likely that Thror and Thrain set this particular thrush, one of those who came tame to the hands of my father and grandfather, the duty of watching the secret door, so that others could use the instructions on the map to find the secret door, should neither Thror nor Thrain return, as indeed through ill fortune proves to be the case. So Rateliff is speculating that this was all planned by the dwarves themselves. In other words, instructions were given to the thrush, or maybe the thrush's ancestor, that, hey, if you see a band of dwarves looking for the door, knock if it's Durin's Day and the sun is setting. Now, look, this works with the facts, but it reduces the impact of outside influence on the fulfillment of prophecy. And given the importance of prophecy, especially in the very last paragraphs of the book, I can't say I land here. I mean, certainly Rateliff makes a very good point, and it does work. It just may not be where I land.
It fits the facts without necessarily. Well, although now that I'm thinking about it,
doesn't
I wonder.
Please me as much.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, we want there to be a supernatural element here, as opposed to just the dwarves just set all this up,
thinking ahead, right?
Yeah. Although it does, you start to wonder about things like, what's the last thing Gandalf says to Bilbo? Surely you don't disbelieve the prophecies just
That's
because
exactly
you
why
had a hand in
I
bringing it
feel
about
like
yourself,
there's
so.
got to be some outside influence. But
Yeah.
certainly, the outside influence might just be, in this case, if Rateliff's correct that this was how it was set up, that the outside influence on Iluvatar's part is just making sure they get there at the right day and time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That they did get there in time.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, the message itself, the prophecy was created by the dwarves, but it was, indirectly fulfilled by Iluvatar himself. That could be
Right.
That could be how it works as well.
Fascinating questions, though.
Yeah, really good questions. Well,
I still like the idea of a vision somewhere, but
I do. I don't know how it came through, and I don't know that we'll ever know, but certainly enjoyed taking a look at that question. So,
Yep.
thanks again for that question, David, and thanks for everybody else who took part today. Folks, that wraps it up for another episode of the Prancing Pony Podcast. As always, we thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to having you join us again next week for our interview with Michael Drought.
And in the meantime, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes for us and leaving a review, we'd really be grateful for that. Those reviews, as I say pretty much every week, help us get a little bit more visibility in iTunes. That just gives us a bigger and more exciting community of Tolkien lovers listening to us.
Absolutely, and thanks to those of you who have. We do read every single one of them, and we genuinely appreciate, even if we don't understand, all the nice things that you say about us. Please make sure you subscribe to our podcast through iTunes or your favorite podcast app. That way you won't miss a single episode, and you can find us in just about every podcast directory.
That's right. And we want to thank all of you who've become part of our social media family. We set out to start a Tolkien conversation that everyone can join. And that's why we have the online common room on Facebook at the Prancing Pony Podcast and on Twitter at Prancing Pony Pod.
And one last thing, as always, don't forget to send your questions, comments, or YouTube renditions of 15 birds and 5 fir trees in full goblin costume to Barlaman.
That I want to see.
That will be good. To Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com. That is our new email address this season, so be sure to take note. Barlaman at theprancingponypodcast.com, and we'll try to get them into our next episode. Well, hour 35, hour 40? Still far too short a time to spend among such excellent and admirable listeners, but until next time.
Farewell, friends.